Professor Stiglitz, it's an honor and a pleasure to have you here in Bern at the Foreign Ministry. I would like to start with the question about think tanks. You are a founder of a think tank yourself. You have founded the Initiative for Policy Dialogue in 2001. What was the reason for that? Why a think tank? You're working at a university, so why did you need a think tank?
Well, it grew more out of my experience at the World Bank, where I had seen that the international financial institutions often had a very strong view about what the right policies were. I thought often those policies were wrong, but whether they were right or wrong, to be effective, there had to be domestic discussion. There had to be discussions within the countries and an evaluation, participation on what was being asked of them, what their policy frameworks ought to be. So that's why we started this Initiative for Policy Dialogue, with the notion that there ought to be a democratic dialogue. If we believe in democracy, the core of democracy is that there has to be a discussion, an understanding of what is about to, of what the rules, regulations, legal frameworks, and so forth, policies, and that in many of the countries, there wasn't the space, the framework for this kind of policy dialogue. People wanted it, but there wasn't the institutional framework. So we had actually 3 parts to our program. One part was research, to try to bring out the ideas that the debates. Why was there a debate? What were the 2 sides? Not just one side. And usually there are more than one side. Secondly, communication, that we had a journalism program that was trying to bring these ideas to ordinary people through the press. And then the third was public dialogue, that we would usually try to find some local partners, and with those local partners, bring in people from abroad, bring in, including people from the international financial institutions, but to have a more open discussion of some of the key issues.
Are you trying to work together with government there as well to integrate government people directly into these programs?
Oh, very much so. I mean, many of these, if not most of them, would be where we would have government, international financial institutions, civil society in the country, business groups in the country. So it was an attempt to say, if we're going to have democracies function, all the voices have to participate. And yes, they participate sometimes in the parliamentary procedures, but some countries, parliamentary procedures are not as strong as we would like. But beyond that, it has to go beyond that, and it has to involve more citizens. And so that was what we were trying to do, to open up channels of communication.
Just before, while on the walk to the place here, I told you about our think tank, the foraus, the Swiss Forum on Foreign Policy, where we have a membership system, a grassroots system, where people come to us and present their ideas on what they want to publish. Do you think that might be an interesting model that could work in the United States as well?
Yes, I mean, one of the weaknesses is that some of the most engaged institutions, civil society, in foreign policy are elite institutions. They have, because they're elite, you might call it establishment people, often with close connections with financial and corporate interest, and less with, you might say, broader civil society. And that was one of the things that actually motivated me in my original engagement in these issues. Take an issue like social insurance, old age retirement. I had been in the Clinton administration, and inside the Clinton administration, we had a very active debate about reforming our our old age pension program. That debate was in part motivated by deep concerns among the people and among civil society in the United States. But when I came to the World Bank, in this foreign policy context, you would not have realized that there was actually a controversial issue. There was a establishment view that at the point it was called a three-pillar system, but a lot of support for privatization. We had opposed privatization of social insurance. We had had a debate about it, but we came to the view that that was the wrong way to go. But the World Bank and the IMF were pushing that view as if it were obvious that it was the right way.
So there was hardly any dialogue between the national and the international foreign policy level.
Exactly. And the people who at the international, even in the United States, were predominantly linked to this establishment view and unconnected with a broader discussion in the United States, which said, really, we need to have systems of social protection, and the market doesn't do that very well. The market doesn't provide insurance against inflation. The market doesn't protect you against the volatility in the stock market. So we need more than the market is likely to provide. Well, that's important. And so that's precisely why I think it's important to have a think tank that is more rooted in society, even when we're talking about foreign policy. Foreign policy should not be something that's left to an elite. It is something that's important to everybody in our societies.
You've just participated now in the World Economic Forum in Davos, which is widely considered as an elite place for meetings and for the exchange networking. What was your impression of that? Is that a fact? Is that an elite kind of way to exchange, or is it a broader dialogue?
It's somewhere in between. I mean, it clearly is dominated by the elite. They do make some efforts to broaden out. They have groups of academics like me. They have 4 or 5 labor leaders, minuscule relative to where to go, to the number of people from the corporate world. Critics might say it's tokenism, but I think it's more than tokenism. I think it's important to hear their voices. But I don't think one can view the discussions that go on at Davos as, you might say, representative. I mean, I think it's important for people to get together and to share their views, but it's not a substitute for, you might say, a broader, more democratic discussion where the voices of labor would be heard more loudly. They say they're heard, but they need to be heard more loudly. The voices of the elderly, who might be, if you had reform in retirement, might be left out in the cold. So there are whole large groups in our societies, and particularly when you start talking about globalization, large groups of people in the 6 billion people around the world who are not members of this elite, whose voices are not adequately heard. Again, they make some attempts to bring some people there, a lot better than if they were not heard at all. But I don't think anybody would say it's a balanced discussion.
The slogan of the World Economic Forum was the reshaping of the world, thereby implying that the crisis has some kind of being overcome to a certain extent. What is your impression? What did you take with you from the World Economic Forum?
A great deal of worry that there was a complacency, that, for the last 5 years, things have been bleak. Wasn't clear how deep, long the downturn would be. Now that Europe, for instance, has moved from negative growth to the expectation, not certainty, but the expectation that 2014 will be very mild but positive growth, has changed people's attitudes enormously. Now, you have to frame this, understand that in any other context, the growth forecast for Europe for 2014 would be viewed as a disaster. Per capita income adjusted for inflation in Europe, in almost all the countries, with the exception of Germany, is markedly below what it was in 2007. And even in Germany, the average rate of growth over the last 5 years is something like 1%, something that you would say is a disappointment. We look at Japan and we say, what's happened there? We call it the Japanese malaise, we criticize it. But Europe is in a deeper malaise, a deeper period of non-growth, negative growth in most, depression in Spain and Greece and a number of the other periphery countries. So I think it's premature to have this celebration, to be uncorking the champagne bottles. What worries me also is that there is this almost cognitive dissonance. They listed in the risks at the beginning of the forum, inequality. Oxfam came out with a very powerful paper pointing out, for instance, that half the wealth of the world, roughly, goes to the upper 1%. That 85 people, what you could put in a big bus, had as much wealth as the bottom 1 or 2 billion people. Enormous inequality. So after recognizing the magnitude of this, no real discussion about what to do about it. It was almost like it's the weather. We have to learn to live with it. People say we need to do something about it, but that's almost always followed by some statement, but we have to be careful because we don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. We don't want to go to an extreme. We have to understand. So that in a sense, after recognizing the depth and the severity of the problem, no real debate about what are the key issues to be done about it.
Okay, maybe let's move now to Switzerland. Well, we are actually with the World Economic Forum already in Switzerland, but Switzerland has shown itself to the world in the last couple of weeks as a host in Davos, but also in Montreux for the Iran negotiations. What role do you see for Switzerland as a medium-sized, very open economy, very strongly reliant on financial services in the future after the crisis? Where could it position itself?
Well, you might say that historically Switzerland has played an important role as a neutral power, but neutral shouldn't mean moral neutrality. It's not as if every position is equally valid. And I think that's the kind of position that it should try to attain, that you're not one of the vested parties, but you bring to the table a moral force, a sense of values. So, for instance, internally, Switzerland has been very successful in maintaining high levels of employment, very low levels of labor market inequality. So it, in many ways, succeeded in what other countries would have aspired to, even in spite of globalization. But on the other hand, there are areas which traditionally have been problematic, but Switzerland has been moving. We have to recognize that bank secrecy has facilitated tax evasion, avoidance, whatever word you want to use, around the world. And in that sense has contributed to not only inequality, but to corruption and to money laundering, to, you know, that when you have tax havens, when you have secret bank accounts, people from developing countries where there's high level, particularly developing countries, not all, but where there's high levels of corruption, know that their time in office is limited, move money to where it's safe, rather than reinvesting their country, so really undermining development. And then when they get thrown out, which happens inevitably, they have a comfortable life in the North. I think one of the positive outcomes of the global financial crisis is the move in the G20 and around the world to limit the scope of this bank secrecy. And Switzerland has joined in that global effort, and there's still a few outliers around the world. And I think it's important for Switzerland to show you don't have to live off of this secrecy. You can be transparent, open, and people come to you not because of your lack of sunshine, but because of your competency of your financial services that you provide.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Stiglitz. It was great to talk to you, and I'm very much looking forward to your speech here at the Foreign Ministry.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.